You could find 3 Python files associated with this section. The first file is called python_unittest.py. The second file is called python unit step1_1.py. And then the third file is python unit step2.py. The first file, python unit test, goes over the unit test module a little bit. It's not in depth just because we're all relatively new to programming, or the intended audience is a bit new to programming. Therefore, going in depth into unit test module is not the aim of this section. What we're doing here is just to show how to use the unit test for the related function that we're after. I have also provided a link in the file itself for you to take a look if you are interested in knowing more. The most important thing that we're going to look at is this part about importing unit tests as well as starting your test cases with the name test. It's inherited on the unit test of test cases, but inheritance in object programming is outside of the scope of this class. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a look at this test string method, and we're going to write 2 tests in our test class. They both started with tests, and they have to start with tests in order for unit tests to pick up. So the first self-assert equal, the assert function, is to compare the first unit and the second unit, or the second element, to make sure that they're equal. So if we take a look at the string of switch and the upper function, we'll see what they do. So if we fire up a interactive prompt and we say switch upper, we could see that it returns the uppercase of that string. So what we're doing right here is to compare if this one, the first element, is equal to the second element, and the test will pass if they're equal. And I've also provided a second test for is upper. So again, this starts with the test string, and we're here to assert true. So if we're saying switch is upper, and we test it out again in the interactive prompt, we'll see that the result is actually true. And so what we're saying is to assert if this element is true or not. If we exit out and we run the test of python unit_test.py, we could see that 2 tests were run and both tests passed. As stated right here, what if we switch the name to be lowercase switch? And that would come out to be false, right? So let's do a real quick test and say switch is upper, and that comes out to be false. So once we switch that over, and let's run the test again, and now we could see we ran 2 tests, but now we have 1 failure case. Python would try to give us a reason, and right here we could see that the assertion error false is not true. So let's switch this back and take a look at our first example. In our Python unit test step 1, what we've done here is repeated the same process, but we've shortened out and say the assert equal is a variable that we got back from this function called switchOS. And the switchOS should return a switch version, which in our case, if we say our approved version is 9.3 with sub-release 3, that this switch version should equal to this number that we're looking for. And then the first step, if you remember, is we're actually writing a test and not write the code itself, but just to write the test and run that test. So in this case, I've created the simple function switchOS, and I have hard-coded the switchOS value that we will return back into this function as 0.0 and then sub-release 0. So again, this is the function that we're writing code against, but we're writing a simple function that return a known value that we know is false back into this test case, and then we're comparing that result into our intended result, and we're using the assert equal. So if we go back to the Python example folder, and we're running Python unit test step 1, and now we could see that we ran only 1 test, and now we have 1 failure, and it will try to give us the reason why it failed. And now that's what we expected, is that 0.0 does not equal to 9.3 and subrelease 3. Great. So moving on to step 2, where everything else stays the same up to line 10. And now what we're doing is we're trying to improve on the code and trying to make the test pass. And if you remember the steps that we've taken in the last section on parsing the JSON file, what we're doing right here is we're just going to repeat the same step, and we're going to parse out that file and get our switch OS. And now we're returning this switch OS, and we're comparing that with 9.3. So let's take a look at what the result of that is. Python unit test and step 2. And voila, now that when we run that test, it equals to what we're looking for. So it's always a good idea to say if, let's just change this to 2 and see that if that test failed. Yes, it does indeed return back into the result that we're expecting. So let's change that back. We could run it again, but we don't really have to. And we could also do assert not equal or assert false or assert, not true. Or there's various functions that I would encourage you to go ahead and read this doc if you're interested. But this is, in a nutshell, a very simple example for the TDD process where we write the test first, we run the test, make sure it fails, and in fact, testing what we're looking for, and then we write the code to actually conform to that test and make the test pass. So if you recall, the next step for us really is to improve this code and refactor this code. But since this just 5 lines of code, that I don't think there's a lot of improvement that we could do unless you want to be more efficient in reading the file. And of course, in the production environment, this will actually go out to the production equipment and grab the OS version back and then compare to the release that we're looking for. So hopefully this example was able to deepen the understanding of our TDD explanation earlier.